Copyrights be damned, I just couldn't resist playing some 1914 for this. I know the game takes place in 1916, but that's close enough. 1914 is already a band that's entirely focused on World War I, and in my opinion it's one of the best recent black metal bands, period. I could go on about some stories about 1914, but it would be terribly unprofessional of me to get sidetracked right from the first sentence. Conscript is a survival horror game about trying to survive the World War I frontline that's been developed by Catchweight Studio, which is really just one guy, Jordan Mochi, and published by Team 17. Right off the bat, survival horror and World War I feel like the perfect match. It's one of the most horrific events in human history, and the technologies of the time lend themselves perfectly to survival horror mechanics, with the poor communication, both when it comes to sending messages via homing pigeons or transporting supplies and ammunition. It's a pretty interesting setting overall. Just like any sane person, I am generally against war, and that actually extends into me not really being into guns or more realistic modern warfare shooters, since that reminds me way too much of current day violence, which is all too real. That might sound a bit hypocritical since I'm a medieval weapons nerd, but that feels so much different since it was literally ages ago. It feels almost detached from reality by this point. World War I has some of the same effect. Yes, it already uses guns and explosives, but it's far from modern day warfare or even World War II warfare, which wasn't even that long after. There would still be some antiquated elements in the gear used, like the bright red trousers in the French uniform, swords still being used to a degree, and then the most outlandishly to me, some metal plate armor still being worn. While being similar enough to more modern methods of war, World War I was far less evolved, resulting in arguably even worse conditions for the common soldier. On top of that, the world hasn't seen the amount of chemical warfare that was used during World War I, and I don't know if it has after it either, since it was generally frowned upon due to how horrible it was. Also, please don't quote me on any historical facts, I'm not too great with history. The main thing that Conscript does right is it understands the horror of war. It's always tense, it's terrifying, and it's bleak as hell. The maximum amount of lives were wasted for the minimal result, since World War I mostly just set the stage for World War II. It's morally bleak too. Well, of course it is, it's a war after all. But to paraphrase the developer himself, World War II was much more like Hollywood. It's often simplified down to Nazis being the bad guys that everyone hates. But World War I wouldn't really have any clear antagonists. It would be just young men sent to die in a meat grinder for the sake of their governments. Having not seen horrors of such scale, these young men fed with propaganda would start out hopeful and patriotic, only to return with trauma, PTSD, or not return at all. Right from the first hour, Conscript is as drab as it gets. You play as a French private Andrei. You're stuck in muddy trenches that are being besieged by Germans. The entirety of the color palette consists of brown, grey, and black. You're equipped with nothing but a trench shovel. "They're back," is the one thing Andrei utters in dread as he heads out. Andrei finds his brother Pierre injured further down the trenches, but his duties don't allow him to stop and help. So they get separated, and the main goal and the general gist of the story is that Andrei needs to find his brother so they could both get out of this hell alive. The actual plot overall is fairly simple in the game, but I'll abstain from discussing it much to avoid spoilers. When it comes to gameplay, Conscript wears its inspiration on the sleeve. It's a whole lot like the classic survival horror games a la Silent Hill or Resident Evil. You have to go around the maze-like environment looking for key items to get past various obstacles and fight or avoid various enemies along the way, all while managing very limited resources and inventory space. It might have a bit more direct nods to Resident Evil with the mysterious merchant and the way you can either sell him raw gemstones you find, or you can steal them to combine them with some jewelry later on to sell for more profit. I guess the big difference is the camera perspective always being top-down instead of over the shoulder or completely fixed in cinematic angles. That makes it look a little like a twin-stick shooter, but it's far from one, since the combat is as awkward as you'd expect from this kind of game. With every attack you have to stop and aim while the enemy keeps getting closer, and they rarely go down in one shot. I would have liked to be able to move at least very slowly while aiming, maybe at the cost of accuracy, but that's only one of many disadvantages the player has to deal with in combat. Since the resources are scarce, every bullet counts. If you have more than one weapon, you always have to make careful decisions about what kind of ammunition you want to spend and what you want to save for later encounters. You might not want to use any bullets at all and smack the enemies with a melee weapon, but those have durability too, and the close range greatly increases the risk of getting hurt, and healing items are also a luxury. Melee combat is usually a last resort, just like in real life. Although I have to admit, the larger battles are adrenaline fueling in the best possible way. You might be able to avoid some enemies altogether, but with the way the game is structured, you'll be backtracking a lot, so some narrow passages become vital to secure from enemies. It might sound like an easy decision to just kill everyone, so it's peaceful later on, but you also need to be tactical about where you kill people, because the battlefield has become feeding grounds for monstrous rats who develop the taste for human flesh. And unlike the human enemies, rats respawn over time and become constant resource drains. Whether you get bitten and need to heal, use weapons to get rid of them, or decide to use fuel to burn the bodies for good or destroy the rat nests using grenades. There are almost no moments of peace in this game, just like how you would imagine it being in the front lines. You can only save at designated spots, which make the game ever more intense. Playing on the medium difficulty, I didn't find the game all that difficult mechanically, and would rarely take more than 15 minutes between saves, but due to how oppressive the game feels, the 15 minutes would feel like an hour, and I'd have to take frequent breaks between play sessions to wind down. And also because I would have no idea how long will I have to go before the next time I can save, and I'd have no clue when I might get interrupted with real life things. It's not all that bad as I might make it sound though, because Conscript is actually pretty great when it comes to accessibility. It has multiple difficulty settings for different kind of players, and the thing I was a big fan of is that it had different saving options. By default you'd have to use ink resource to save, which would make the saves less frequent and the game more intense. But you can opt out to have unlimited saves, which I did, and you can have automatic checkpoints. The only drawback of those options is that you cannot get an S+ rank using them, which doesn't lock you out of any endings or content, it's purely an achievement thing. I truly appreciate that kind of thing as someone who might not necessarily always suck at games, but definitely as someone who has a very limited amount of free time. And those who want to have more of a challenge are free to do so. For example, there seems to be an achievement for a pacifist run, and after finishing the game, I have no clue how that's even possible, so that should be plenty of challenge. I think the only thing I would have really liked mechanically is something that could have been stolen from Hotline Miami. Yeah, it's an entirely different game, but I would have loved there to be a button to pan the camera around a little, allowing me to see slightly further in one direction while seeing less in another. That would be so helpful when trying to take some enemies by surprise in a more open location or a particularly long corridor, but you're forced to always get pretty close. The game is mostly linear, and with the way the puzzles work, it feels like you have to go around and explore every single corner of the game, but I was fairly surprised that I still managed to miss some things. There are quite a few weapons in the game, several for each ammunition type, so you could choose which one fits your playstyle the best. I did find plenty of pistols, multiple shotguns and rifles, but there was an entire weapon type I managed to miss, and I only know that because I kept finding bullets for it. Or another example, I got multiple upgrades to my stamina bar, but I only found out upon watching a gameplay video that someone else made that it's also possible to upgrade max health, which I never did. I still have no clue how that's done. It could be some well hidden item, a side objective reward, or maybe something you can craft by combining items. The presentation of the game is quite superb. As you can see already, Conscript uses this stylized retro pixelated look. And that's a point in a video I'm working on about old graphics, but in my opinion, low resolution graphics can work extremely well when trying to depict something very dirty and nasty, which can be surprisingly tough with high fidelity graphics. Despite the characters only moving in 8 directions like pre-rendered sprites, it looked to me like they were actually 3D models that had some pixelation filter going on. I'm not against that kind of thing, and it's likely a technique I'd use myself if I was making a video game, but those kind of filters make things look a bit messier and would flicker more than actual pixel art or pre-rendered sprites. I could be wrong about the technique, but that's what it looks like to me. I overall really like the look of the game, but I can't deny that there would be some readability issues, especially when it comes to parts of the environment you can or cannot walk on, or some doorways that are on the sides or the bottom of a room wouldn't always be obvious. Sometimes the perspective would mess me up a bit when lining up a shot. I would think I'm about to pull off a sneaky headshot, only to end up hitting a corner of a wall I think I wouldn't, and in turn alert all the enemies around losing any advantage I had. I have a case of an enemy literally shooting me through a wall recorded, however, so there might be more issues than just the perspective here. I was also surprised at how well the different areas were defined despite all sharing the very limited drab, grey and brown color palette. I guess I can't forget the green crust too. I don't know what it is about old and very compressed visuals having some ugly green hues, but this game has them and it feels very authentic. Anyway, despite it initially looking like the locations in the game are mundane and grounded in reality, I feel like I can immediately recognize places from just a glance. Maybe not the exact spots though, thank goodness for the very useful map in the game that even lists what places need which key items. But yeah, the trenches in the beginning feel way different from the shelled town in the mid-game, which also happens to give me slight flashbacks to Funger 2 Termina. Even the more nondescript swampy locations would look slightly different from one another just from the slight variations in shades. One might look like it's entirely covered in black ashes after a battle, while another feels more muddy and soggy after a long rain. And the last area, the fort, is even more maze-like than the rest, which at times is annoying, but I can't say it's unrealistic. I've been to some World War II fronts in Lithuania and Poland, and while it's not the same exact thing, those places do look very easy to get lost in. Also while playing, I low-key expected the game to pull some supernatural elements, since it's a horror game, but it never did, and it's actually all the better for it. It could have done something akin to Amnesia the Bunker and made some spooky monster preying on the already terrified soldiers, driving them even more mad. Or it could have easily went the Silent Hill route and made the enemy soldiers into terrifying monsters, being shaped into such due to the protagonist's own mental state. But the game never did any of that. Well, there would be a few places that would borderline look like the corrupted dimension from Silent Hill, but it still wouldn't break the immersion and would work perfectly fine as the one artistic liberty used to accentuate how hellish the whole situation feels. Although I guess the merchant is the one paranormal thing in the game, how does it get to every single safe room before me? Other than that, the game is entirely grounded in realism. A war is already utterly terrifying as is. It doesn't need embellishments. It's not about any heroism, devoted patriotism or camaraderie. It's just senseless murder, survival of the fittest, and the absolute worst place humanity can go to. If anything, the way how real the war feels makes the game even scarier. It might not have jumpscares or things of that sort of unusual horror game, but the oppressiveness of the whole scenario works just as well. All the enemies are just down-to-earth humans, yet they're still enemies. It would always feel intense encountering the heavily armored enemies both due to their bulky stature and their high damage tolerance, but the lowest rank recruits yelling in their teenager voices would remind that they're still humans and they don't even want to take any part in this. They're forced to kill just like you are for the sake of survival. There can be no hesitation. Just like yourself, the enemies would have pictures of their loved ones or would cry for help when injured. Soldiers on both fronts would be found going completely mad and unable to do anything anymore. It would sometimes feel like the merciful thing to put them out of their misery. But then the cynical brain turns on telling me not to waste weapons and create even more fodder for the rats. You can come across mass graves in the game, and they're piled like that not just for efficiency, but because there are so many corpses that there are not enough coffins for everyone. That stuff's dark. It is required to turn one's heart off for human suffering, and that alone is terrifying. I can only say good things about the sound design too. Actually, Conscript is an extremely rare horror game in which I would actually turn the volume up instead of down, although that might just be low mixing. While it doesn't necessarily do anything spectacular or unheard of when it comes to sound design, it doesn't do anything wrong either. Everything sounds just right, from the gun and cannon sounds to the petrified screams. The music's pretty simple and mostly just a background kind of thing, but surprisingly I found it quite memorable. The softer tunes of the main menu or the safe room are always welcoming. While the extended, descending notes outdoors remind me of bombs falling out of the sky and just looming dread. The more practical things like enemy callouts, foot stomps and whistles, indicating that more are charging in, are all very useful. Despite the game being pretty linear, there are multiple ending variations. While avoiding spoilers, I could describe the two ending requirements as the amount of bravery and thoroughness. The puzzles and obstacles in the game would always require a degree of thoroughness, but generally they are pretty manageable. I did, however, only get the second to best ending despite feeling like I myself was thorough enough, because I simply didn't connect the dots for the one a bit more grand puzzle on my own. And that's the thing, some puzzle answers can be randomized, so you'd have to figure them out on your own. If you don't, not even a walkthrough could save you. Although I said the second to best ending, no ending in the game is really good. Well, the worst ones are objectively worse, but the better ones are more about just unlocking more context and information rather than actually being better. And really, what good ending can there be in a war? Sure, some countries might claim they're victorious, but ultimately, everyone loses in a war. There are countless victims, and even more suffering. Even if you come back alive, even if you don't have any obvious wounds, you're scarred for life by the horrors witnessed, the worthlessness of life, and complete loss of humanity. That is what Conscript is successful at portraying. That's why I feel survival horror is such a great genre to portray war. No shooter that makes the protagonist into a Rambo or strategy game that completely dehumanizes the fighters could portray such a message as convincingly. So, is the game good?
Yeah, I would say so. If you're a fan of properly historically accurate settings, classic survival horror games, or if you enjoyed something like Darkwood, I can easily recommend Conscript. The fencing is fascinating how it's made by a single man who had no clue how to code as his first video game ever. Pretty inspiring stuff for indie devs.
Wait, what the heck is this? I thought I had completely gotten rid of my flesh twin, and now he's back doing a shitty World War I cosplay? I better go sort this out. Goodbye. Gotta go. See you in the next video.